Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to BrightGen's Summer 16 webinar. We're going to make a start now. For those of you who have not joined us before, I'll just quickly run through the format. In a second, I'll hand over to the brains of the BrightGen outfit. That's our Chief Technical Officer and Salesforce MVP, Mr. Keir Bowden. Keir will run through the key features of the up-and-coming release. Apologies beforehand, we usually have a number of emergency vehicles come past during the webinar, but please don't be alarmed. We just happen to be located between a fire station, ambulance station and a police station, so please bear with us. We usually have at least one. Anyway, the format also says if you have any questions during the webinar, if you'd like to use the question sections of the webinar panel, I'll collate these and then feed them to Keir afterwards, and he'll cover them off at the end of the session. So just having a quick look at the agenda, this is what Keir will be running through as the key features of the release. There's a section on the Lightning experience, Sales Cloud, some analytics information, Service Cloud improvements, something on the mobile communities, chatter and files, and then at the end, any sort of platform updates that are coming in as part of the release. So, without further ado, here he is, your very own Mr. Keir Bowden.
Thank you very much, Clive. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, as Clive said, to our Summer 16 webinar. So, without further ado, we'll start cracking on. So, our main event today is the Summer 16 release of Salesforce. So, not every feature we'll cover today applies to both Lightning Experience and Salesforce Classic. So, look for the icons on the slide headers, which are basically the left-hand side. The Lightning icon is supported by Lightning Experience. Right-hand side is supported by Classic. If there's no items, that means it's not related to either UI. So, it's something like it's a setup, or it's a mobile, it's a platform, or it's a community feature, which don't really have any difference between those two. So first up, the Lightning experience. So you can now customize the home page in Lightning. If you click the gear icon to open the setup menu and select the edit page option, as is shown there, that'll open the Lightning app builder, which basically allows you to add, remove, or replace elements as you like. So everything with a border around it, you can see highlighted in blue here. There's an element at the top, which is the performance chart, which I wasn't particularly keen on. So I can then update my home page, and I've removed the performance chart, and I go straight into Account Insights. And if I've got any custom Lightning components, I can drop those in where the performance chart, the quarterly performance chart used to be. So that's something we've been waiting for a little while. It means you can actually now customize the home page directly with Lightning components rather than as it's been up to now, completely static. So in a similar vein, you can edit a record page. So again, you click the gear icon, choose the edit page option. Again, this opens up the Lightning app builder. So you've got the palette down the left-hand side with all the components that can possibly be dropped into this. And then each of these elements you can see I've clicked on something on the far right in the activity. That then becomes a draggable component, or I can choose to delete it, so I can move things around, I can manipulate things. So again, any custom components you've got, you can drop in here. Up until now, if you wanted to customize this in Lightning Experience, you had to embed Visualforce, which made it quite difficult to control the height and width. So in my particular case, I just dropped in a little custom component just with an important message informing people of an upcoming deduplication event, and that then gets displayed on all account pages going forward. So I don't have to override the whole page like I had to in Visualforce days, but I do have full control. It's not just like I can drop in a component like I could drop in a Visualforce page. I can also remove components that I don't like the look of. At the moment, they're still fairly large components, so I haven't got the ability just yet to override small parts of it, but that is something which is intended to be coming in future releases, giving you kind of real granularity, almost down to the point of being able to replace what a particular field looks like on the edit page, for example. That will be a little bit of time before we get to that particular nirvana. There's some new chart types available in the Lightning experience. So top left, we've got funnel charts. Those are available in both reports and dashboards. And then going clockwise from there, we've got a scatter chart, combo chart, which can plot multiple series, and cumulative line charts, which kind of increases the total rather than plotting individual points. And those last three are only available in dashboards. Also in dashboards, you can now undo or redo actions when you're editing them. So here's an example where I've added a new accounts by annual revenue component, but that's pushed my opportunities by stage down a bit further than I was expecting. I was hoping that would all fill in. So rather than having to try and shuffle things around to return it to what it did look like, I can simply hover over the undo button, which is the sort of arrow pointing anti-clockwise there. And there's a tooltip that shows what I'm about to undo, which is move a component. So if I click that button, then that removes the component and reverts the layout to its previous incarnation. And if I change my mind again, I just click the redo button, the clockwise arrow, to reapply the change. And this isn't limited to a single action, so I can undo a whole chain of actions. I can effectively undo 6 or 7 actions to revert a dashboard back to how it looked when I first started editing, and then I can reapply all those 6 or 7 actions if I so desire to keep everything as with the new changes that I'd made. So hopefully something that will speed up dashboard editing there. Next, something that's quite a neat utility to allow your charts, your donut and funnel charts, to be a bit more readable. So you can now combine small groupings. So basically any values less than 3% just get combined in as another value. So here my total value of my others is 770,000, rather than having sort of 47 tiny little slices, which I couldn't really figure out exactly what was going on there. Key thing about this is, while this is a feature of Lightning charts, you have to configure this behavior in Salesforce Classic. So you configure it in Classic, but you can't see it in Classic. You have to switch to Lightning to actually see the effect. Okay, so next up we have some changes on the Sales Cloud. So first, this is something I know that many of our customers over the years have been interested in, and it's something that I've implemented various flavors of. And this is being able to associate one contact with many accounts. So as you can see here, contacts still have a direct relationship with a single account, which is very much how we've been used to using them, also known as the primary account. But you can then click the Add Relationship button to create a new indirect relationship, and you can create as many of those as you like. So basically, the direct relationship is kind of the master, the primary account, and then you've got indirect relationships if those contacts have relationships with other accounts, or maybe if they move around, I guess. People have worked in places and are working somewhere different now. Something to note is that if you disable this behavior, all of your indirect relationships will be deleted. The direct relationships will remain, and that will be effectively, there'll be a single account that can be associated with a contact in that instance, much like it currently is if you don't enable this feature. And you also have the option to stop activities from rolling up to the primary account. The basis for that is not all of your activities will necessarily be on the primary account when you have contacts related to multiple accounts, so you may not want to see everything rolling up to a single account. At the moment, you don't have the capability to roll them up to the various indirect accounts, although that I haven't seen anything to suggest that that's coming in a future release, but hopefully that's something that will be brought along soon. Okay, so next we have autofill and account logos. So if you enable logos, and this is Lightning Experience as shown by the icon top right, if you enable logos, then the suggested matches where there's a corporate logo available for it, that will be displayed. So as you can see here on the IBM core, that's actually got a corporate logo. The others have just got the generic account logo because there's no logo associated with them. The autofill side of things means that as you type, you get selected matches which are displayed, suggested matches rather. And when you select one, not only does that populate that aspect of the account and the name, but it also autofills any additional information that is known to the system. So, for example, the phone number, the email, maybe one of those as well. So the documentation of this, the release notes of this says that this includes, is the keyword, US-based companies. It doesn't say it's limited to US-based companies. However, in my pre-release org, it did seem to be mainly focused on US companies, though I did see it on larger UK companies such as British Airways. Account autofill is generally available, while account logos are in beta for this release. So for those who haven't come across the Salesforce definition of beta before, what it means is that the code is production quality, but has known limitations, and it's intended to become generally available within 3 releases. Most of the time that happens. Every now and then you get something like field sets, which took, I think, around 2 years to make its way into GA, so clearly was a little bit more of a tricky customer. Next up, product suggestions, similar sort of concept to the account autofill side of things. So on an opportunity, when you click add product, the resulting screen will suggest up to 5 products that you've recently added to other opportunities from the same price book. So effectively, they're your most recently used products from that specific price book. In this case, I've only accessed 3 from that price book, so that's all it's showing me. And obviously, this doesn't stop you from entering all or part of a product name and searching for a different product and using that. Just intended to save you a little bit of time. So next up we have note sharing. So here's a note that some of you might recognise from our last webinar. So this is a picture of the BrightGen headquarters in all their glory. And there's a new sharing button available, which when you click on that, that brings up a sharing dialogue. So you can share a note with users or groups, and you can also restrict any further changes to sharing by the recipient. So basically you can share a note with someone, you can then ensure that they can't share that on to anybody else and they can't manipulate any part of the sharing. They just effectively get the access you've given them and nothing more. Next, another quite nice feature, calendar from anything. So this basically allows you to create a calendar based on any type of S object. So what happens is, if you go onto your calendars, if you click on the calendar icon on the left-hand menu, open up My Calendars, and then click the new calendar, click the gears icon and click the new calendar button. You'll then be asked to choose which object you want to base the calendar on. So what I'm basically saying is that my calendar is based on a custom object, it's named request, and then I have to select some information about what the date is that's going to be plotted on the calendar. So is there a start and end date, which would be the case for something like an event, which can potentially span multiple days. In my case, I've only got a single one, so you only have to supply the start date. You don't have to supply an end, although you can. It'll be assumed to be the same if you don't supply it. And then I also decide which field I want to display on the calendar. So in this case, it's the description. So basically, for every date where I've got a request which has a deadline of that date, I'll see the description of it in the calendar as per the following screenshot. So quite a nice feature there. And you can create a number of these across any number of S objects. So next up, we have the Service Cloud. So Omni-channel to begin with. So you can now track an agent's time on work on Omni-channel. So this includes the handle time, which is the elapsed time between accepting and closing the work item, and also their active time on an item, which is based on the browser itself, which is the cumulative time where they have that item open in Salesforce and the browser window is the focus of what they're currently doing. So if they've got it open but it's in the background while they're browsing Facebook or something like that, then that won't contribute into active time, and you'll be able to see there's quite a lot of inactive time. Some omni-channel limits have been increased, so you can now have up to 5,000 queue work items per hour and up to 10,000 pending routing requests. You can also configure predefined decline reasons. So when an agent chooses to decline a work item, they also have to select from one of your pre-existing decline reasons. And finally, you can toggle notification sounds if you don't want your agents being distracted. There's a lot of them in a small area and there's a lot of notifications going on, then that might get quite irritating, I guess. Next, knowledge articles. So you can now attach articles to work orders, which are part of the Lightning field service, making it easier for technicians in the field to quickly find the information that they need to look at in order to get their job done. You can map case fields to data categories, which is quite neat, in order to filter for articles assigned to those particular categories. So, for example, if you had a case with a product field, then you could map that to the data category of the selected product, and then articles that match the mapping would be shown at the top of the suggested list. So essentially, it's a way of getting very targeted knowledge assistance based on the contents of the case. If you have validation rules on articles, up until summer 16, if you broke a number of validation rules, it would be a little bit of a death by 1,000 cuts, in that you would get one error, fix that, then it'd tell you the next error, you fix that, then it'd tell you the next error, and you fix that. So what happens now is all of your validation messages are shown at once, so you don't have that kind of drip feed of individual errors. Spell checker has been removed from rich text area fields. And finally, when you create a new version of an article, you can see the created date of the original article, so you know how long that particular article has been around in the system. So, moving on to mobile. So first off, some news on Salesforce Classic Mobile Lite. So for those that haven't used this before, this is the historical free mobile application from Salesforce. It works on standard objects only, and you can't really control the data set that is sent to that device. It's really based on records the user has recently accessed. So this is being discontinued as of summer 16 if it currently isn't in use in your org. So if it's something that you thought in the past that you might be interested in using, then it's worth turning it on so that it doesn't go away. So the only real reason you might consider using this is because it allows you offline access to those standard objects. But for pretty much everything else, you'd be far better off using Salesforce One. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you're thinking of switching over to this. But if it's something you have already looked at and you think it might be of interest, then it is worth turning it on, because once Salesforce turn it off, you won't be able to get it back. And in a similar vein, if you're currently using this, then make sure not to disable it, because if you do disable it, the option that allows you to re-enable will be removed. So you would need to contact Salesforce and ask them to re-enable it. You would effectively lose control of being able to turn it back on yourself. So a bit of Salesforce One housekeeping. So there'll be downloadable applications, which are typically Android, iOS, the apps that you actually download and install onto the device. So those will be released sometime after the summer 16 release goes live. There's normally a delay of sort of a week or two after that. For the latest version of Salesforce One for the iPhone and the iPad, you need iOS 9.2. You can still use an older version of Salesforce One if you're on an earlier version of iOS, but obviously you'll then be stuck at that version. You won't get any enhancements or improvements. So Salesforce One works with Chrome and the Gmail web view in iOS, but this is not a supported option. So if you use it at your own risk. i11 support ends on December the 16th, 2017. Very accurate date for some reason, which effectively means that Windows 8 support ends there as well, because i11 is the only supported browser on Windows 8. So the recommendation is to upgrade to Windows 10 and the Microsoft Edge browser. And finally, BlackBerry 10 support ends with the Winter 17 release of Salesforce. Okay, next some Salesforce One changes. So a counter has been added to the related lists, so that you can see if there are any records without having to click into the list as you do at the moment. I need to be disappointed to find there's no entries in there. You can change the owner of a record. This is something we've been waiting for a bit of a while. We can retire a few custom solutions now. So you can change the record owner as long as you have the appropriate permissions on the record. Record types on events are now supported. So when you create a new event, if you define different record types, you'll be asked to pick which one you want to use. So I've defined 3 here. I'll have to pick from one of those when creating an event. And as of summer 16, offline access in Android is in public pilot. So don't often see a public pilot. This basically means that you can enable it yourself. You don't have to contact Salesforce to turn it on. However, the flip side of it being a pilot is there's no guarantee that functionality will ever go generally available. So if you think about it carefully, if you decide that it's something you really need to rely on, because it may not be there. It may not be there in that guise, and it may not be there at all, because that's the nature of a pilot. Next, some changes to communities. These are a bit of a wall of bullet points, I'm afraid. There's no pretty pictures in this one, so please bear with us. So Chatter Answers is no longer available to new orgs. So if you're using Chatter Answers at the moment, it's not going to go away. It would just mean that if you spun up a new Salesforce org for another part of your business for any reason, Chatter Answers would not be present there. The recommendation is to switch over to Chatter Questions, which is where all the new development effort will be going in. You'll need to update your community templates to the summer 16 version if you haven't already updated them to spring 16. If you did update to spring 16, then you don't have to do anything, as those will be automatically upgraded. There are a couple of new settings if you allow unauthenticated users to raise cases, which is effectively what guest community users are. So that user profile will need the access to support API permission, and then you need to add the create new case to the quick actions for whatever page it is that you allow them to navigate to in order to raise that case. And in the Napoli templates side of things, your members can now insert images directly into rich text areas rather than having to add them as attachments to a post. Continuing with communities, you can now attach 10 files to a single post. You can also add and remove files from the attachments list when you're editing posts. Something that I quite like, but I don't know how many people are actually going to find this particularly useful, is that you can publish formatted code snippets to your community. I don't think, as a rule, we typically share code in that way to our customers, so probably won't be making a huge amount of use of that internally either. Global search is now available, so again, this is something I know we've implemented a few flavours of in the past on communities, but there's no need to do that anymore. Global search is now supported in community. As are broadcast groups. So for those that haven't used broadcast groups before, they're a special type of group where only the owners and the managers can create new posts. So effectively they are broadcasting information. Group members can comment on those posts, but they can't push their own posts up there themselves. So it means you don't get any noise or clutter in the group. You just get the key messages that you're trying to push out. And there's also been some enhancements to topics in communities. So topic detail pages can now display a topic description and a list of articles that are tagged with the particular topic. Internal users can now log in through the community login page rather than having to go back to login.salesforce.com, which is quite nice because I often find myself for some reason back at the community login page. I think when I've logged in as another user and then logged out for whatever reason, it often decides that I'm a community user. I need to go back to that page. So that will save a couple of clicks. Users that are in your community, so not members, these are internal users. They'll have their profile page accessible to them now. And also internal users will have a link to the developer console if they need to go and look at any log files or anything like that directly from the community builder profile menu. And finally, the community builder link is available in the profile menu of a community. So this is more around, those last two are much more around if you're actually a community builder, if you're creating that community rather than if you're using that community. But if you are kind of creating things, trying them out, seeing if something goes wrong, going and changing them, then this will save you a few clicks if you are actually doing that work and we're not doing that for you. Okay, next, some updates to community moderation. You can now apply rate limits, effectively throttling to your community members. So what this means is it limits the number of items of content that a member can create in a set number of minutes. And based on this, you can either notify the moderators or you can freeze a user. And you can set different limits for these. So, for example, you could notify moderators if someone posts 6 items in 5 minutes, but then freeze them if they post 10 items in 5 minutes, because you've probably got a good chance they're spamming your community. Moderation rules can now be subject to member criteria. And this allows you to target moderation rules at individual users based on their profile, their type, the creation date, or whether they've created content in the community before. So it allows you a bit of granularity around your moderation rules rather than them being quite a blunt instrument that apply to all users. You can also moderate private messages in your community. So if a member flags a private message they've received from another member, moderators can view the contents and take actions via a report. And finally, you can just ad hoc freeze problem members, and this prevents them from logging into any communities. If you're using the Napoli templates, the freeze action is only available in the Spring 16 version or later. And you can unfreeze those users at any point in time. So the idea is you're not removing them, you're just basically putting them on the naughty step for a little while. So next up we have Community Insights. So this is the new name for reports, basically. So data is now actionable from report. So you can flag, unflag, or delete posts, comments, files, and private messages, all from inside a report. You can also freeze and unfreeze members, and you can approve posts that are currently in moderation. You aren't stuck with these actions. You can change these on a report by report basis, but each report must have at least one action defined. And finally, you can see the contents of items in reports for posts, comments, and private messages. So you can actually see the body of those without just seeing the title and having to click through to view the actual underlying detail. Next up, Chatter. So the chatter layout's been revised in the Lightning experience. Prior to summer 16, it's what you see here. Whereas in summer 16, it's become a bit more of the more familiar 3-column layout that you're currently seeing classic. And what was tabbed content has now been moved to the left-hand side. Don't really know what the reason behind that was. I guess that the feedback from users has been they preferred the old way. Next, we have group engagement, which is something I think is actually really cool if you're using chatter groups. So basically, by clicking on the engagement tab in Lightning Experience, which is next to the collaborate tab when you view a group, you get 3 charts, 3 information panels. So the top 2/3, the 2 charts, show you how the membership has increased over the last 30 days or 12 months, and the bottom third shows a kind of high-level view of all-time activity. So this is a group on my pre-release org, which only has, I think, 2 or 3 user licenses. So there's not much in there, but obviously a real group would have a lot more going on. But also it'll allow you to see how much use is being made of groups. Have you plateaued in terms of users joining it, in terms of posts? Just more useful insights if you are making heavy use of chatter groups. And finally, a not so cool feature, in my opinion. So as of summer 16, all chatter notifications will contain badges for users to download Salesforce 1, even if those users are already using Salesforce 1, which is particularly nice. These are enabled by default, and I would suggest that you consider disabling. I'm certainly going to disable it on our org, basically because users are likely to think that I've added this in because I want them to install whatever this application is. So if they're already using it, then that's going to be a bit annoying because they're not going to gain anything out of it. And it may be that you've got people who aren't using it because you're in the process of a rollout, there's a planned rollout coming soon and you're not there, and all of a sudden users are going to think, okay, we're ready to go on this, I'll just download it, start using it and start asking for support. So one to consider as to whether you want this functionality to remain. So you can disable this if you want to from the setup menu under apps, chatter, email settings, and then you deselect the checkbox there, the show Salesforce 1 mobile app download badges. Onto our final topic. I'm sure everyone will be pleased to hear, the Salesforce platform. So the first one I think is actually really exciting. It looks fairly minor, but I think everyone's going to be very pleased with this. So basically, this screenshot is from one of our Enterprise Edition sandboxes, and if you look at the value for custom apps and tabs, we now was, I think, 10 custom apps or 25 custom apps. We're now up to 250 if we want, and custom tabs are at the limit of 25, and now our maximum is 1,200. So basically, the limits have been removed. So the release notes say on custom apps and custom tabs, the exact wording is we can use as many of these as we like. So I'm not sure what happens if you actually hit 250, whether you just contact Salesforce or they up it. I'm sure we'll find out at some point in time, but it'll probably take a little while to burn through 1,200 tabs. So I know that's something that's going to be of interest. I know a few of our customers out there are tab poor, and we've been kind of shuffling things around to keep tabs available. So that should go away come summer 16. You've got as many, probably be the opposite issue, that you'll have too many tabs, then there'll be too much clutter. No one will really know which tabs they should be using. So another cool feature on Process Builder. So Process Builder can now execute actions on more than one criteria. So looking at a process in summer 16 at the moment, once it's carried out and emits some immediate actions and potentially any scheduled actions, there's a stop button on there. However, I can now click that button and I can choose what happens after I've evaluated that criteria and created and taken the action. I can either choose to stop the process, or I can fall through and go on to the next criteria, which is what would happen here if I changed it around that way. So essentially, my first criteria is this an unvalidated account? If it is, then take an action and then go on and say, is it a prospect account? Yes, it is. Go and take some action. At that point in time, I'm stopping. But effectively, I could have 4 or 5 effectively unconnected conditions to allow me to take action all from a single process builder, rather than at the moment having to create a process per discrete action. So I think that will make things a lot more usable from that perspective. Global pick lists are now in beta. So a global pick list allows you to specify a single set of values that are used across multiple pick list fields. So a very common use case for this would be something like a field on lead and opportunity that must have identical available options, but you have to define those in two separate places. So you can effectively say these are the options that apply to this field on opportunity and this field on lead. And if I change those, both of those fields reflect that. This also stops users adding values via the API that aren't present in the global sets, which can help to keep your data clean, because at the moment, if a user carries out a data, not so much a user, if an administrator carries out a data load that had some values that aren't present in your pick list, those will just be added in anyway. They just won't be added to the list of pick list options for other people to choose, but they'll still appear in there. There's a couple of known limitations with global pick lists because they're in beta. Remember, production quality with known limitations. So firstly, you don't see the values on the field detail page. So here's an example off the opportunity, off the campaign. So I can see the object name, I can see the data type, but normally if this was a pick list, I'd be able to see all the values. But instead, what I get here is a link that I have to click through to then see the underlying values of the blog topics, because I've used that on another custom object as well. And also, you can't change the type of the field backed by a global pick list, apart from to switch between single and multi-select. Restricted pick lists are now generally available. So there's much like I was saying in the global pick lists. This allows you to define a restricted set of values by checking the box of strictly enforced pick list values when creating a pick list field. And what this means is that you can't add values via the API outside of that predefined set. So if I've got a list of, I know, salutations, Mr., Mrs., Miss, and someone tries to upload a record through the API of Doctor, if I've ticked this box, then that update will be rejected with the error that it's a strict pick list, strictly enforced pick list, and that value doesn't exist there. What you can also do, which is quite nice, is you can deactivate and reactivate options without having to delete any underlying values. So if you need to retire an option, so say Doctor used to be a valid salutation, but you've decided you don't want to use that anymore for whatever reason, then you can deactivate that option. That will leave all the existing data as is. You don't have to go and disrupt any of that data, but it just means nobody can create any new ones going forward. You can edit an object. This is another nice feature on the Lightning experience for those that spend a lot of time maintaining things. You can now edit an object definition directly from a record page. So basically, if you click the gear icon and this time choose the edit object at the bottom, then that will take you through to the object manager, the Lightning experience object manager for that particular object in question, allowing you to then update record types, fields, page layouts, etc., etc. Next up, we've got some security changes. So logging into Salesforce now requires HTTPS. Frankly, you should be using that anyway if you value your data, and I'd be amazed if anybody that we're working with doesn't have that as a mandate anyway, because otherwise you really have no security while your data is in transit. If you've turned on two-factor authentication, you now have the option of creating a temporary verification code for users who've lost or forgotten the device that they use for this. This code is only valid for 8 hours. You can also delegate two-factor authentication tasks, including generating temporary verification codes or disconnecting verification methods if a user loses or replaces a device. And when a user adds an identity verification method, they now receive a confirmation email that has taken place. So the health check page, this is a setup page that was introduced in Spring 16. So this now identifies risks in the remote site settings and login access policies. Also in Summer 16, this health check information is available via the tooling API if you desired to pull this out and to surface it in another system or process it in another system. It's now available via an application programming interface. Next up, there's a couple of security changes around Lightning components. If you don't know what these mean, then that means you don't need to worry about it. It's only if you've actually been developing Lightning components that you may have encountered these. So access check errors are now starting to be enforced. So this is a critical update. You can apply it, but if you do apply it to your production system, you can't undo it. So the best thing to do is to test in a sandbox first and determine if it's going to stop any of your functionality from working. It's been a little bit tricky up to now to determine what are real access check errors, because there's been a bug in Lightning components that's caused a load of false positives to be flagged up and suggest that a component doesn't have access to its own attributes. So hopefully that will be resolved as part of the Summer 16 release as well. And the Lightning Locker service becomes available in Summer 16. So any new orgs created after that release will have this turned on by default, while for an existing org, it's another critical update that will be enforced for everyone in Winter 17. So there's a little bit of grace. So the purpose of the Locker service is to enforce isolation of your Lightning components from each other and the rest of the Salesforce UI. And what that means is that you can't drop a custom component into a record homepage that then goes off to the document model and starts wandering around changing things that it doesn't own, which you would be able to do at the moment because of the way that browser security is enforced. So the Locker service will basically restrict you to only be able to change the elements that you've actually added in through your component. And you can find a bit more information about this at the short link URL shown. But as I say, if access check errors and Lightning components aren't something you've been developing, then you don't have to worry about any of this at all. I do. And our final content slide for today, so well done everyone, just a couple more platform items. So you can now override a record view action with both the Lightning component and a Visualforce page, and then depending on what you're using, the Lightning experience will display the Lightning component override, while Salesforce Classic will use Visualforce, or I guess potentially an S control if you have a mature org and you're still using S controls. Lightning Connect has been renamed External Data, and again a couple of other features that if you haven't been using Lightning Connect, then you don't need to worry about this, but because of the way that external object searches were constructed, then embedded hyphens were removed, which is a bit annoying if you needed those in the search. So that's been rectified and they're no longer removed. And also the mechanism for separately loading external object related lists can now be set up with a couple less clicks, because basically the choice that you make for internal objects in terms of whether you want to separately load them or load them all on the same page at once, it basically mirrors that internal setting. So you set it in one place and it applies to both internal and external objects. And finally, Visualforce for Lightning Experience is fully GA, and I don't actually know what was stopping it from being fully GA before, whether anything's changed. I couldn't find out any detail on that. We've been using it. We haven't had any problems, so I guess it was something esoteric or something minor that we didn't really worry ourselves about. So as always, this has been a whistle-stop tour of the new features in the Summer 16 release. There's loads more information in the Salesforce release portal at the short link URL shown in the first bullet here. So that'll include the full set of release notes, 300 odd pages for those that like that sort of thing, as I do. There's training material, there's feature videos, and that will continue to be built out over the next couple of weeks as the Salesforce Summer 16 release goes live, which is scheduled to hit EU5 this coming weekend, which will be, what, the 4th of June, and I think the rest of the EU instances are going on the 11th of June. So that is it from me. So now I'll hand over to Clive and say, do we have any questions, Clive?
Well, Keir, it must have been so beautifully explained that I don't have a single question for you.
Everyone is now fully aware of all the aspects of Summer 16. That's
absolutely, absolutely. So
in that case, then we can move on.
Sure. So thank you all very much for listening, and I hope you found that session useful. Now, just before we finish up, I'm going to make a gratuitous plug for our free service management event that's coming up on June the 14th, next Tuesday. That's at our offices at Salesforce Tower. And for those of you who are not service customers of ours at the moment, I'll be presenting what our service management offering is and expounding the joys of having me as your service manager. So,
who wouldn't like that?
Yeah, well, of course. So you're all more than welcome to join. There's a link there. I'll be sending out as usual, the slide deck and the YouTube recording of today's webinar, and that link obviously will be included. Please feel free to register and come along and hear what we've got to offer regarding managed service. Again, thank you once again for joining us. If there's any part of the webinar that you want to discuss in detail, or and privately, by all means, you can give us a call on the number there you see, and we will be absolutely delighted to go through anything you want to discuss at that time. So, without further ado, I think that's it. Thank you very much, Keir, for all your pouring through all those release notes for us. And thank you once again, everybody, for attending. And hopefully we'll speak again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.